So, Leslie, more than 1 year into this epidemic, circumstances are still changing constantly. So, we're riding a roller coaster of uncertainty. What does that do to people living with constant uncertainty?
Well, I think that's somewhat of the definition of trauma. When your current environment no longer feels safe, it no longer feels expected. There's no more rhythm of life. And that's the thing, the consistency that brings us all back down. So this constant state of uncertainty makes it absolutely impossible for any of us to plan our future, to plan what we imagined, junior year, our wedding, all these big milestones sit kind of dormant and holding.
In processing for the future, what can we look to for the psychological needs whenever this is over?
Right. And, I think so much of this leads back to grief, because there is a loss in not having these ceremonies, these rituals. These have been put in place as a way to help us move from one part of our life into the next. And it's almost a doorway of acceptance and celebration. And when we can't have that process, we can't have that ritual, a lot of times that grief does not get processed as well. And it's, we think of grief frequently in terms of death, but there's also grief in the unexpected not happening, because so often we don't realize what our expectations are until they're not met.
What is the true definition of trauma? Because speaking personally, I'm looking at this whole last year and a half as a slow rolling trauma. Am I looking at it the wrong way?
Yeah, it's interesting because the word trauma, again, gets used a lot. And I think that we need to be careful. Not all trauma leads to PTSD or chronic PTSD. So let's talk about this a little bit. So trauma can be any situation that makes a person feel unsafe, can bring up feelings of scared feelings or sadness or loss or anything. I mean, a lot of times we think of trauma in terms of maybe a severe car accident, or maybe somebody is sexually assaulted, or somebody's been to war, and those are kind of extreme examples of trauma. But trauma can be much less significant as well. And cumulatively, we've been all feeling this all at once. We're all kind of going through this. But granted, yes, we all have different tools. So some people may develop PTSD, and that post-traumatic stress disorder would look like, maybe an individual having nightmares, or, dissociating at times, or, not being able to deal with certain senses because smells, sounds, because it brings them back to a certain place. So depending on what somebody's history is, depending on the tools that they have, depending on their personal experience during this pandemic, would determine whether or not it becomes an actual diagnosis like post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of the trauma.
What are you seeing in your own life, in your own treatment, and your colleagues and healthcare professionals whom I'm sure you're interacting with, in how they are processing or how they're putting one foot in front of the other right now?
Well, I think mental health has always been, a field that's been underfunded, underpopulated, because it is underfunded, and because the burnout rate is exceptionally high. Also is, a tremendous amount of education is required, and so when, the salaries can't meet the educational demands and that sort of thing, there tends to be a bit of fallout. But this is a system that was taxed before this ever happened. And now we have a global pandemic. And honestly, it has been overwhelming beyond words. And, at some point, there's not enough self-care or space for, rejuvenation or recharge. out there to keep us going, but yet we do. I personally get a lot of refueling from other professionals in the field. I have a lot of very close friends that do the same work as I, and we like to get together and share our feelings and how we're processing things on a kind of a very high level of just where we're at, and we haven't even been able to see each other because of the enormous amount of, we all just have had our noses down for over a year.
So what does that do to you as a person in your functioning? How are you?
I'm okay.
Because you have to be.
Because I'm sleep deprived. I'm really weary. And it's not the kind of weary that, a weekend on the Cape is gonna, take away. I'm frequently overwhelmed, I'll be honest. It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's an awful lot.
What is your advice for coping skills?
You and I talked prior to this beforehand, and it almost feels hypocritical to have this conversation because it is such a struggle for me. So it's really simple. Walking my dog in the woods every day is something that happens rain or shine. And it's so simple, and it almost sounds ridiculous to say. But I, don't answer my phone, and we just walk. And we do the same ridiculous walk every day through the same location.
But you're getting nature, you're getting
Yes.
an animal who's asking nothing from you but to be on a walk.
Right. And I can do that because it's for her. She needs to get out, right? So
Yes.
if I can't do it for me, I can do it for her, because it's hard to justify doing anything for me at this point.
An important part of human exchange is the exchange of energy, the support and the nourishment that we get from being in each other's presence, right? Right now, we're in each other's presence because we're vaccinated, we're sitting at a distance. You came in masked, we are fully masked in this facility.
Right.
But your practice now, by necessity, has had to move to telehealth.
Yes.
Is there something lost, some level of communication that you're not able to accomplish through telehealth?
I initially was quite hesitant. The reality was there was absolutely no way for me to see the number of clients that I see and maintain proper, CDC regulations. I couldn't wipe down my couches because they're fabric. We would need to sit on metal chairs. I couldn't take temperatures coming in and see the number of people that I see. So it's moved to my home office, which was my former art studio. So we did a little moving around, and I moved the studio and everything else, and I set up a space. And a large chunk of my population that I specialize in see are young adults and teenagers, those who are age 11 to about age 30 is probably about 90% of my population. So that population is very accustomed to using technology. And in some ways, it's been absolutely wonderfully incredible, because they can show me their rooms, they can show me things in their rooms, they can introduce me to friends and people in their homes. We would never be able to do this if I was in the office. I get to see them in their own environments, which I never do.
So it's the converse. You actually get a broader picture of their lives.
Yes. Yet they show me things on their wall that are meaningful to them, which brings up conversations that we would have never had they been in my office. Also, for a lot of these kids, some of them have parents that have been working around the clock since the pandemic has started, because there's doctors, nurses, whatever, and they don't need to worry about transporting their children to my office. So the kids never miss their appointment. It never needs to be rescheduled. And I work until quite late in the evening, and I have kids that are all ready for bed, sitting on their beds, having their session right before going to bed, and we can close with a little meditation, and then they go to sleep. So, in that way, there's so much about it that works beautifully.
Could this potentially be a progression of a new way to effectively help people?
Well, I believe that this has changed a lot in the mental health field. It works. Does it work with all individuals? No. Does it work with all populations? No. Not everybody has access to an iPhone or FaceTime or Zoom or some of these other platforms that we're using. So, but I do think that especially for those in very rural areas that don't have access to mental health services, this is groundbreaking. And, I currently have clients literally all over the U.S. right now. And it's, my caseload has shifted from just local folks to friends and, colleagues and everybody else kind of in a larger, geographic area. So that part has worked really, really quite well. The downside is technology can be a jerk sometimes.
Yeah, it can.
Sometimes cameras freeze or, and people can't hear as well. And so, we work around those. But I would say the benefits probably outweigh the disadvantages.
That's incredible. That's a great thing. So something great that has come out of this.
Absolutely.
Relationships.
Yes.
Anecdotally, I'm hearing so many more people deciding, when this is over, I'm going to go live on the island. I'm getting into that RV. I'm divorcing my husband. Not me, but
right.
Or we are knitted together so much more. So what is it about this time that is laying bare the realities of relationships or lives?
Yeah, I think it's stripped away all the extras, and it's brought many things down to its bare bones, so we can look at it for what it is. And like all things, there's beauty in that, and there's also ugliness. And there have been a number of individuals deciding to make changes in their lives in regards to their work that they do, their jobs, relationships. But what do you do when you decide you want a divorce in the middle of a pandemic? You can't do anything. So there's a lot of things, relationships that have become quite toxic that are on hold until the courts are less backed up, till a person goes back to work so they can retain an attorney, or another kind of piece that adds to this is, as you know, folks have been drinking a lot more alcohol since the pandemic started, and I don't know whether that's for coping or out of boredom, but that adds a whole other level of kind of complexity and chaos to relationships that could be, in need of a little bit of help before all this started. So,
So we have people who have always been in crisis, who are very vulnerable, who are maybe in relationships or in circumstances of domestic abuse. So those vulnerable populations, because of an overtaxed, stressed system, are in more crisis than ever and almost unreachable.
Yeah, trying to find a safe bed for somebody who is struggling with a domestic, violence situation is near impossible because facilities are full, but they can't be completely full because they're trying to, respect COVID guidelines, so they can only be partially full, and they were full before all of this started. So there's a lot of people stuck in very horrible kind of compromised situations. There's also a lot of children who depend on resources with the schools for food and for therapy or for various therapies, and they have not been able to get that as well. And I know that we've looked and tried to find ways, the government is working to find ways to ensure that some of these needs are met, but the reality is that it's really unfortunate that nothing is happening quite yet.
So we really need to go back to the neighborhoods and looking out for each other.
Checking in on our neighbors. and the people we care about, giving of our time if we can, and our resources. I mean, it sounds so basic, but there's so many struggling through this.
And in some ways, in good times, we don't need each other as much, or we don't think that we do.
Yeah.
And the reality of how much we need each other, particularly locally in our society, currently, we are also having a sort of reckoning where things have become more tribal, if you will. There seems to be more that we are objecting to in each other's philosophies or thought processes, which seems antithetical to what we need to get to.
Yes.
Is there a reason why this is happening? That well, there are many reasons why. But
Yes.
is there at a time of fear, do people become more tribal?
You know, I think you and I know that there's been clearly a significant change in attitude since this has started. I believe that the original feeling going into this was one of hope. And, you know, I remember every day at a certain time they would cheer the nurses on and the healthcare workers going into the hospitals as the shifts were changing. And, you know, people were being kind to elderly people, knowing that they were struggling with, you know, a significant amount of loneliness and that sort of thing. And I don't know if it's just absolute fatigue, exhaustion, or, you know, if people are just kind of hitting some level of despair, but it seems like we are so polarized and divided. And I don't know, my personal feeling is that people are on edge. You know, people are blasting their horns at each other if somebody's driving a little bit slower, or even just the speed limit. People are snapping and irritable. And, you know, all of these are reactions to grief, to loss. All these are indicators of depression. And, you know, I see it and I feel it, and I don't know what the answer is. So, you know, I see it as we maybe all take responsibility for ourselves and try to bring awareness of kindness and love to those that we come encounter with on a daily basis, because this has not been an easy road.
Late August of 2021 right now, we're entering fall. With uncertainty, we don't know.
Yes.
What is your greatest hope for the coming year?
Well, obviously that those who can will get vaccinated, and, you know, should a booster be required in the future, that, you know, people will be open to that. I also think my greatest hope is that people reevaluate priorities, because there have been some sweet spots that have come from this. I've never spent so much time with my children as I have during this pandemic. And it's been an honor to be with them through this time and to see their growing and their learning and their changing. And I don't want that to ever go away. I don't want to ever be so busy again that doesn't be, you know, the most important thing. So maybe we just all sort of reevaluate what's important to us.
Thank you for watching. We are grateful for your attention. If you like what you saw, please like and subscribe to The Local Scene here and share everywhere. Thank you, friends.